Hello and welcome to our first educational session of the day. For those that might just be joining us, like I said earlier, if you missed the introduction or the welcome message earlier in the day, we've got a great lineup of speakers and topics on the schedule today. So please, please, please ask any questions that you have, leave comments. I will be keeping an eye on the group chat all day long and do my best to get those questions answered as we proceed through the talks here. So it is my honor to introduce our first guest, Dr. Talin Amadian, and we'll be talking about not just becoming a practice owner, but specifically becoming a practice owner as a new grad OD. So thanks for joining me, Talin. It's a pleasure to have you here with me. Yeah. It feels like forever since we've seen each other in person, probably a few years ago now. And for those that are watching, Tal and I were just chatting a bit before coming on live here about this awesome new venture in your career. So I'm excited to continue learning more and looking forward to what you have to share with our viewers here. So owning a practice, it's one of those things. I feel like when it comes to choosing careers after optometry school, maybe you're in your fourth year of school, or perhaps you've been out of school for a year or so. And when it comes to deciding on a job or career, I think it's easy to exclude private practice ownership as an option. So Talin, I mean, you became a practice owner after how many years of optometry? How long have you been out of school now?
I've been out of school for 3, so I would say 2.5 years after graduating optometry school. It takes a few months after school to get your license, but in California at least. But yeah, I'm now out 3 years, and congrats to the class of 2021. If any of you guys are listening, we've all been there, and I hope you take today, this lecture and the rest of them, just kind of as encouragement, because it's tough, and what you guys went through was probably a million times different than what Antonio and I went through in the middle of the pandemic. So congratulations. This is meant to be more of an inspiring talk, more of a yes, you can. So for me, when I was in fourth year, we had practice management, just classes, little lectures here and there. And I always thought that it was not unattainable, but I always thought, give me 5 years. And that was just kind of the number in my head, which was a little less than what other people thought was their number. But for me, I said, just give me 5 years. And my plan was to work in ophthalmology because I love ocular disease. So I actually chose my rotations according to that. So I did a lot of ocular disease and ophthalmology rotations. I said, I want to get a job in ophthalmology. And long story short, that's what I did. And but I've always really thought of myself as a leader. And so I love managing groups and leading projects, both in school, out of school. That's just the way I like to function. So I knew private practice ownership was for me. And some might say it's really unconventional to want to work in ophthalmology before having your own practice, and they would say that it's better to go and work in private practice optometry to kind of gain that momentum.
Sure.
But for me, I wanted all the exposure that I could get of ocular disease and be able to apply that in my practice. So when 5 p.m. on a Friday rolls around, I want to know exactly what's happening to my patient. Or on a Saturday when they can't see an ophthalmologist and they come in with like a big retinal detachment, which has happened.
And it always happens. It always happens on a Friday or Saturday, as we all know.
Exactly. So just to know how to gauge that urgency and be able to take care of patients the best that I can. So that was kind of my idea. And I did want to go into business, and eventually I did, but just having that solid ocular disease background for me was very important and very helpful. So yeah, that was kind of my journey right after school. And then
what was your like primary motivation, I guess, for becoming a practice owner? So like you said, you wanted to get started in ophthalmology, and you did that, obviously, but it sounds like your ultimate goal was to become a practice owner one day, maybe a little bit later on in your career, but it obviously happened sooner. But what was your primary motivation, I guess? And yeah, so just curious in case, others can relate to that who are watching.
Yeah. So if sometimes I like to dig deep and think, when did I really think that I'm going to have my own business? And it's always kind of been that way because I come from a family of entrepreneurs. Both of my parents, they had their own businesses, and everyone really around me had their own businesses. And so growing up, that's what I saw. And I knew I wanted to kind of watching my mother go to work was like she was going to her office. And to me,
Hmm.
that's what work was. And so once I decided that I want to go into optometry school, I knew I was very into the medical aspect, but also the customer service, retail aspect, and being able to have my own business. And so just the fact that I'm able to bring those two things together, that's why I feel like it's perfect for me, private practice
Yeah,
ownership.
definitely. And did you decide to um, buy into a practice, or did you open a practice cold? And what were some of the things that you thought about when you were making that decision?
Good question. So I purchased a practice. Um, and I didn't really know about my options before either. So I did a lot of research. I did not buy into a practice. So in order to buy into a practice, you
Mm,
become a partner first and then take over a whole or whatever the
got it.
arrangement is.
Yep.
I bought the practice as a whole. Um, it's a little bit different than cold starts because you have a practice that's already set up. So there are some pros and cons there.
Hmm.
But for me, given where I was in my career and not being, I didn't know much about practice management. I was just kind of learning as I go.
Yeah,
And so
sure.
for me, I just determined it was the better thing to do, to purchase a practice. But I mean, I'm not opposed to starting both, and maybe one day that will happen. But
Maybe your
for
second practice, right? When you open a second
yeah,
location.
exactly.
Yeah. So I guess walk us through that in particular about purchasing a practice outright. I mean, I'm sure there's pros and cons to that, as you were mentioning. One of them is you've obviously got an existing framework, an existing patient base, I'm sure, but I'm also sure that there's some things that were challenging associated with that too. Just patients that are used to coming there, sure, there's an existing patient base, but they're used to seeing this other doctor maybe, or they're used to someone else owning the practice. I mean, especially if you went and rebranded, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, I guess, here. So
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, I can probably go on for days, but going back to what you said about the expectation of seeing somebody else whenever the practice, I mean, my practice has been here in this building for 20 years, and so as you can imagine, a lot of families, a lot of longtime patients have been coming to see the doctors that were here before me. And so it's more of a challenge for me because one of the doctors that used to be the owner, he's an older male and I'm a younger female. So it's kind of like a surprise when the patients come in, but my staff does a really good job at educating, and he actually does a really good job telling the patients about my training versus his training. And believe it or not, I mean, our training is a lot more expensive than what it was in, I don't even know what year, but
Hmm.
we've come a long way, and we do have a lot of advancements. And so once the patients see that you're able to provide this higher level of care, it's kind of like a no-brainer. Of course, there are a few that say, no, I
Yeah,
don't want to see
sure.
you, and that's their choice, and I
Yeah.
don't really push it, because I want to have a choice as well. But
Hmm.
the the fact that he transitions the patients to me and kind of does that little talk in the middle, that really helps. Um, but other than that, I mean, there's so many little nuances of taking over, and you know, all of the things that you said. Again, I can talk on and
Yeah, sure.
on
And I
about
do know, and to
work.
your point, yeah, I mean, to your point, I'm sure everybody can relate, no matter how long you've been out of school. But anytime you don't even have to be purchasing the practice. You could just be starting there as an associate. And I experienced it myself 1, 2, 3, even 3 years, 4 years out of school where patients were like, whoa, who's this new doctor? Even though I'd been an associate there for 4 years already, who's this new guy? I don't know if I want to see this person. I want to see the senior doc, so to speak. And even during that, I was fortunate that the senior doctor, and once again, I was just working there as an associate, but he really helped in those, that transition and introduced me. He made a point to introduce me to patients, even if I wasn't seeing them that day, just to get people familiar with me. So I do think that definitely helps. And in terms of some nuances, I know one of the big things that oftentimes stands out, or perhaps even deters a lot of newer graduates from purchasing a practice, opening cold, are finances. So we did get a couple questions trickling in through the chat. So I'm gonna do my best here to get them over to you. So so question here is, how did you ensure that the practice you were purchasing was a good practice to buy? So what are some things that you should pay attention to, or that you paid attention to when looking to purchase a practice, such as profits, expenses, revenues, and who knows? I mean, piggybacking off of that, did you work with like a consultancy on that, on the whole process, or, walk us through that?
So that's an amazing question, because all of those are things that I learned along the way. And so I didn't really know what a P&L, I mean, I knew what a P&L, profit and loss sheet, is, but I didn't really understand what it meant with the different categories. So if you're looking to purchase a practice and the seller is serious about selling the practice, you should ask them for tax returns and P&L. And so the tax returns and the P&L go hand in hand. Now, if the seller is hesitant on providing that information, that would be a red flag for me. I would say offer to sign an NDA, non-disclosure, that you're not going to disclose this information with anybody else, but you need to have that information. For me, I had to print it out, dissect, mark, and make sure, I know exactly what money is coming in and what money is going out. And so a lot of times in small business, there's certain things that are taken out of the expenses, and you will learn the art along the way, but there's certain things that are kind of in the middle. So, and all of this I'm saying is totally normal. So some people, your car takes you to and from work, right? And so people write off their car on their P&L, but it's like, okay, what if his car payment is $2,000 versus yours is $500, or you don't have a car payment at all?
Definitely.
You have to normalize all of that and really just, take the profit and loss and then add your own, not add, but kind of substitute your own expenses and see if it makes sense and if the bottom line makes sense to you. I think that's the best place to start, because if it doesn't make sense to you, if it's not going to pay the rent, I would say do not purchase on potential. Don't purchase on what you can do for the practice, because you're not paying for your own potential. That's kind of counterproductive. But whatever you think it's worth, I mean, that's the amount that you should be willing to pay, not what you can. Because a lot of people on the other side can say, hey, so yeah, there's potential for growth. Yeah, but I am the growth. So just bear that in mind whenever you're looking through that P&L.
Yeah, that's some really fantastic advice for sure. And I know that when it comes to finances, I mean, student loans, it's obviously on the minds of most students, especially when it is time to graduate. And interestingly enough, we got a question that came in just now, so I'm going to go ahead and look at it.
Sure.
And I think this is probably a pretty common question, which is also why a lot of newer grads don't pursue this as at least a career option early on, and that is student loans. So question is what, or do you suggest paying off your student loans before buying a practice? So not sure what you did, but perhaps you have some insight into that.
What I did. I can be totally candid about what I did and what works for me, but bear in mind, I'm not a financial advisor. That is my disclaimer.
Yeah,
So what I did works for me. And you know, the way my life is kind of set up at this point, I still have student loans. So I
Mhm.
graduated with student loans. Of course, you know, when I tried to take the minimum that I could, but I needed it for my tuition. So I have student loans. I still continue to pay my student loans. From yes, when I graduated, I wanted to pay off my student loans, but also had goals. So just a little backtrack. I got laid off last year. So in April, I
Mhm.
got laid off from my job in ophthalmology. And so I couldn't really pay my student loans. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of assistance. And, you know, I had savings and you know, I make sure your student loan payments, whatever it is paid on time. That's the biggest
Yeah.
advice that I can give you, because whether you're buying a practice or whether you're buying a house, that is going to be, I mean, that's like the number one thing they look at. So make sure whatever you're doing, you pay it on time. However, I personally have student loans. All you have to do is you have to show that the amount of money that you are requesting, you are going to be able to pay back, as well as your student loan amount. So let's just say your practice makes $5,000 a month. Well, if your student loans are $5,000 a month, just arbitrary number, they're not going to give you a loan, because that should be your number one priority, because that's the federal government. So
Sure.
as long as you know what makes sense on paper, you'll be fine. But again, everyone's scenario is different. And, you know, I know plenty
Mhm.
of people that are hitting their student loans hard. And, you know, I admire that. And it's just different goals. You just need to kind of sit there and see what is your priority and what are you going to be, what's your second priority? And then
Yeah.
just take it from there. Because yeah, student loans are one of my priorities, but um, buying a practice was a little, I don't know. I
Yeah,
wanted a
for
little
sure.
more.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's
That
no
doesn't mean
right
I
or
don't pay my
wrong.
student loans. I promise I
Yeah.
do.
There's no right or wrong. It just really depends, like you said, on what your goals are. And I think that oftentimes dictates most people's strategies in terms of student loan repayment, whether they want to just go super aggressive
Yeah,
and get them out of the way, or keep money to invest in other things
other things.
like a practice. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And like you said, it just depends on what your goals really are. So I'm going to keep looking at the chat here. So if you're just joining us, please feel free to ask any questions that you'd like here in the chat. And I'll do my best just to kind of look back and forth and check every once in a while to relay them to Talin here. Okay, well, as I look here, here's another question. So, and then I'd like to ask you a little bit about practice management stuff,
Okay,
going
yeah.
back to a couple things that you were speaking
Oh,
about
yeah.
before, but let's answer this question first. So I don't know if you have any advice on this or not, but is it better to start a sole proprietor practice or a partnership-based practice? So maybe this is looking at different types of,
Entities or
corporations,
something.
perhaps LLC versus sole proprietor versus. So I don't know if you have any insight to share about that, or just personal experience.
Yes. So depending on where you are in the state of California, optometrists cannot be LLCs. So, depending on where you are, I would recommend, you know, look into your state laws, look into all of that. And if, you know, I personally just did my own research, but there are a lot of attorneys, a lot of consultants that can help you with that. Now, in terms of being a sole proprietorship or a partnership, it just depends on, are you by yourself or is there somebody else that's going to join you? Um, I I would incorporate regardless, because at the end of the day, you're protecting yourself from, there's the entity and then there's you. But if you
Hmm.
go in without incorporating, you will be responsible for anything that happens at the entity. And not saying you shouldn't be responsible, but let's just say, God forbid, something happens and there's a malpractice suit regarding another doctor, and some way it comes back to you, they can come after who your personal belongings, versus if it's the corporation. I mean,
Right.
again, there's little you know, hoops and stuff. But
Yeah.
in a nutshell, that's what I would recommend. Do your own research and then talk to an attorney that specializes in that kind of stuff for sure. Because
Hmm.
I only know based on state of California. In other states, optometrists can be LLCs.
Got it. Yeah, very
Mhm.
good to know. So another two questions here, and one of them leads right into the practice management topic I wanted to transition to anyway. So thank you, Evelyn. But before we do that, can you quickly touch again, perhaps, on the main difference or consideration that you took in deciding open cold versus buying existing?
Yeah.
So,
For me and my level of knowledge and expertise, it just seemed less intimidating. Now, I will tell you, when you buy a corporation, you buy everything that comes with it, and that's everything that comes with it.
mhm.
So you have to make sure that your contract is very clear on what responsibilities that you will be assuming versus what are excluded. Included exclusive assets and liabilities, things like that need to be laid out. So if you're going to spend money on one thing, do it on your purchase contract, because there are going to be things that you're not going to know, you're not even going to know it's an issue. So
Mhm.
you just have to lay out what is going to be your problem versus what's not. And that's the best way. Now, if you set it up in the beginning by yourself, you do a cold start, you're responsible for bringing all these patients in. Now, for me, in the middle of a pandemic, I didn't, not that I didn't think I was capable, but just kind of doing a reality check. I was like, okay, right, open cold, businesses are closing. So
Sure.
so for
It's
me,
even
it
more intimidating.
yeah, and having something kind of set up and having that groundwork in terms of medical billing and all of that, which I used to have zero knowledge on,
Yeah.
that was helpful. And having a staff that kind of is familiar with the best practices, that was helpful as well.
Hmm.
I know some friends that did open cold, but I can't really say how it compares because everyone really has their own experience. You just have to find what's right for you and see what fits your personality best and go from there. And if anyone has any questions at the end, you can always reach out to me and I'm always happy to answer specific questions, but it was just right for me.
Yeah, definitely. And talking, really expanding upon that, and I've mentioned this a couple of times about the whole practice management business thing, and you even mentioned it as soon as we jumped into this. You had said one of the more intimidating things was you didn't have any business background, so to
Oh,
speak.
zero.
So a question, so question that came in from the viewers here is, are there any resources or books that you would recommend for preparing for ownership for someone without any business background at all? So in a nutshell, I suppose, where did you go and learn about business having no business background? And it's funny because when we run our survey every year, one of the things that most students report, like the top thing in terms of their readiness for life after optometry school, business is usually at the very bottom.
It
So
is.
what did you do?
So if I had $1 for every time someone asked me for a book recommendation, and I'm a very big bookworm, so I read every chance I get. So if there was a book, I'm not aware of it, please send it my way. Please find me, contact me, and send it to me. Like send me the link because I would want it. But the process is different in any scenario. So you can read the book, but chances are your process is not going to be by the book. One really good book is The White Coat Investor. I've read that on the plane a few times. It really talks about investing, but not really practice management and ownership. But for me, and I know it's really hard to say this now because of the circumstances, but networking and knowing who and who to surround yourself with and where to spend your time is critical. Just surround yourself with people that are willing to share knowledge. Surround yourself with practice owners that are willing to help you. And chances are, if someone comes and asks me, hey, like, can you look over this and tell me what you think? If this was a practice, would you buy it? By all means, because for me, I spent all of last year digging on Google, research. You never know unless you ask. Maybe someone that you know knows someone that would have valuable insight.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you ask and you share, and I feel like that's kind of in this community, sometimes people are a little bit more competitive, but if you find the right people and you ask questions, there's always going to be, I feel like there's going to be more people that want to help you rather than compete with you.
Sure.
And once you kind of cross that barrier, you're in a very vulnerable state. I mean, I was jobless trying to buy practice. Like, people looked at me like I was crazy. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? But I mean, once you kind of cross that barrier, and once you're kind of comfortable with yourself and the questions that you're asking and the people that you do surround yourself with, that's when your questions are going to be answered. But spend the
Yeah.
time and do the research, because every scenario is different and you need to tailor. Now, one thing I will say is, if you kind of have time on your hands, get familiar with QuickBooks, because finance and things like that, if it doesn't come easy to you, QuickBooks is going to be your best friend.
Awesome. Thank you for the tips. We are almost out of time. We do have about 5 minutes. So in these 5 minutes, I have a couple of questions for you. So I'm going to ask you, yeah. So once you've taken over, so you bought the practice, you're taking over, you're at the helm, and obviously you want to maybe get more exposure, right? You want to start building the practice even more. So, and this is a question that came in through the chat here, is how do you go about getting more exposure? So, maybe marketing, what things are you doing there? And then, so let's just start there, and then I'll tell you what the last two questions I have for you are.
I'll tell you in a nutshell. I believe in marketing and all of that, but your best marketing technique is going to be patient referrals. And so if you go in as the new doctor and you're spending time, you're listening to the patient, you are actually showing that you care, and they're able to distinguish you from the doctor before that didn't spend the time, that's when you're going to get patient referrals. I get so many patient referrals from, patients. Oh, I was walking my dog and she's my neighbor and she told me that I need to come see you, or whatever. Or my sister came in and did ortho-K and now I want to do ortho-K. Whatever it is, if you spend the time, that is going to be your long-time patient. You can put an ad on Google, which I do have, disclaimer, I have Google ads. But that patient is going to come in and you don't know if they're going to come in next year. But your patient referrals are going to follow you year after year. I have patients that, find me on, and say, oh my gosh, I need to come see you. They find me on online or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just, your patient referrals are going to be your biggest marketing, I would say.
For sure. Yeah. All those patients can be your best advocate.
Yeah.
So in the last couple of minutes here, I'm going to give you some of those two really standard questions.
Yeah.
So up to this point, give me your biggest win, your biggest success as a new practice owner, and then not failure, but give me your biggest, I wish I would have known before, or I might change if I could go back.
Oh man. Okay. My biggest win is patient satisfaction. So it sounds really corny, but every time I see a patient went out of their way to go to a review site and write a review or send the staff coffee or whatever it is, that's my biggest win, because I know that I made so much of a difference that they wanted to acknowledge it. And thankfully those wins come on a weekly basis, and that's what really keeps me going, because optometry can get tough just like any other profession, but you have to find what keeps you going, and it's my happy patients that keep me going. On the other hand, I mean, I can't say that I regret doing things a certain way. I'm learning as I go, and there are little mistakes that I make here and there. I do wish I had more time to spend in private practice optometry, but given my timeline, I don't know where I would fit that. I did actually work in private practice optometry on Saturdays when I was working in ophthalmology, so I was working 6 days a week. So I did have a little bit of exposure, but just maybe learning like coding, billing, and the back end stuff
Definitely.
would make things a lot easier for me right now. But again, just going back to what I said earlier, everyone has their own path, and you're always going to have things that you don't know. But what's important is you always have to find a way to ask your questions and do your research, because when it's yours, you can't just up and quit. You can't just throw your
No, you
papers
can't.
away and say, I quit. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no running. There's no running, and there's no hiding.
Yep.
So, well, Talon, thanks for taking the time and sharing your experience. Wishing you really all of the best. Can't wait to see you again in person,
Thank you so
hopefully
much.
soon. And for those watching, I do have a bonus code for you here. So write this down, the bonus code. Without much surprise, should or is ownership. So write that down, ownership. And thanks again, Talon.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, definitely. We'll do it again soon,
Yes.
hopefully in person, maybe. But in about 5 minutes, Dr. Bill Werner of National Vision will be speaking. He's going to be joining us, and he'll be presenting actually on creating a culture with the ultimate goal of truly making a difference. So we'll catch you back here in about 5 minutes. See you then.